Okay, hello everyone. My name is Hamed Ekhtiari. I'm delighted that we have this webinar together, and we are going to discuss about reporting checklists and see how we might be able to promote transparency and reproducibility in the field of brain and mental health studies. We have a series of editors-in-chiefs and senior editors from multiple different journals and also some stakeholders, and we are going to discuss about potentials for collaborations and how we might be able to do things together in the future. And to get us started, we have our first kind of team of people, and I will discuss about the things that we might be able to do. But we had a meeting in ACMP in December, basically last year, and we have been discussing about methodological reporting checklists and how we might be able to promote transparency with a series of editor-in-chiefs of different journals, Nature Neuroscience, Journal Psychiatry, and we have been discussing about how we might be able to extend the discussion to a larger group of editors. And that is the reason that we invited you today to this meeting. And we are going to discuss how we might be able to kind of extend the discussion and promote collaboration in this field between brain and mental health kind of journals, major journals in the field. Diana was supposed to kind of open up the meeting. She has a kind of a family issue right at early in the morning, so she was not able to make it. But we have Charlie Stagg from Oxford and Brain Stimulation Journal who is going to open up the meeting. Charlie, please.
Great, thank you. And thank you very much. It's great to be here and to sort of virtually meet everybody. So going first, I get the opportunity to set the scene a little bit, especially if Diana's not around. To sort of start us thinking in the same kind of things. So I'm here as a scientist from Oxford, but also as a deputy editor at Brain Stimulation, and Mark George is also on the call, who is our editor-in-chief. So checklists, I guess we can go straight to the next slide. So I think checklists are, we're all here, right, hopefully, because we think these things are important. And I think we live an increasingly complex life, and the science we do is increasingly complicated, both in terms of data acquisition and analysis, but also in terms of reporting. And checklists can be an incredibly helpful aid memoir. They can remind us to put in a number of essential facts that otherwise we might just forget. And certainly, working in a field, as I'm sure many of us do, where there are lots of very complicated parameters, trying to remember which ones you need to put in and checking that they're all there can be very difficult. So I can see that they're absolutely useful. But I think there are some things we probably need to think about on the sort of, as we start thinking about how we might implement them. And I think they really do need to be inclusive. I think we need to get the communities involved, thinking about these, developing them. And I mean the junior researchers as well as the PIs, as well as the journals. We need the people who actually do this stuff to tell us what the important things is that they want to know. Because the further we get away from the coalface, the harder it is to remember all the things that matter. I would argue they do need to be fairly universal. I think, to set the scene a bit, I can imagine, and indeed worked with other journals in brain stimulation where, they've implemented some checklists and then noticed that their submissions have decreased because the checklists are hard and it's irritating, and you can apply somewhere, and you can send your paper somewhere else that doesn't require them. So I think we need to have some kind of community agreement, otherwise people just sidestep them. They need to be kept up to date, and that's certainly, I work in brain stimulation. The field is changing rapidly. We're not unique in that. And the guidelines and the checklists from 5 years ago probably don't encompass quite a lot of the things that, the modern ways of doing this, and that we're increasingly using. So I think we do need to think about timely things. They need to be really clear. Speaking of somebody, and I sort of got over this a little bit, but when I did a talk earlier in December, we had just tried to work our way through some checklists and we were left incredibly confused. They are tricky, and they're very tricky if you don't do it all the time. They're tricky if this is something you haven't done for the first time. They're tricky, English is my native tongue. I usually get it. I think trying to do it, if it isn't, and your English isn't brilliant, is really difficult. So we need to make them accessible to everybody so that they get filled in right, so that they're useful. It's not a lot of point having things that we don't understand. And I think they need to be enforceable. I think that's the other thing is, we have, as an editor, I think we have, if we decide this is important, then we have to stick to it. We have to say, if we don't have them, then you're not getting published. And really that has to be the line. And we need to make sure that people are filling them in properly, and it does take a long time. And speaking again as an editor, it takes a long time to go through that. But if we think that's important, then I think we need to. In terms of brain stimulation specifics, I guess that's kind of how I would, I'd want to think about these things in that kind of level of depth. In terms of brain stimulation, particularly, Mark and I had a chat, and I think there are sort of two things. There's a general thing about it, which I think any checklists, would apply to quite a lot of our science, right? I think we need to make sure that we are checking that people do, especially in human participants, people are doing things double blind, placebo controlled, where the sham or placebo control is well defined and is adequate, and we check that it's adequate with a blinding index or something that we all agree. And that, for the kind of stuff we do, if people are looking and saying this is engagement of this region that's causing that there is engagement of that region, and that there is a different region, for example. So those are sort of more general things. And then for each of the stimulation approaches, we do have existing parameters, which are great. They should be enforced a bit more widely, and I include myself in that. But they need to be kept up to date as well, and they're not, right? So it's an active process. It's not a one-off process. So I hope that sort of sets the scene for you in roughly the right amount of time. Thank you very much for.
Thank you very much, Charlie, for joining us.